Hello, Where We Are listeners. If you're a longtime fan of this podcast or you're just joining us for the first time today, we want to tell you more about our podcast platform called Spotify for Podcasters. We've been using this platform for over a year, and it's been easy to use, and new features are added all the time. You can record and edit podcasts from your phone or computer. You don't need anything fancy, and you don't need previous podcast experience. When you hit publish, you will distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify if that's your kind of thing. And with Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. But here's the thing, you can earn money, but it's a free platform. There's no catch. If you're curious or want to see what it's all about, download the Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started.
On this week's episode of Where We Are, we'll talk about what to do when the news is crazy or overwhelming, when you don't know how to process what's coming over the transom. And also a couple thoughts on forgiveness. You're listening to Where We Are. You're listening to Where We Are. We are the Wares. I'm Michael.
I'm Melissa.
And we're back. This is going to be the second episode in just a matter of a few days.
What a treat.
I guess we can't take that much credit since the last episode was several days late, which
details.
But
I just have to, as soon as we shot that promo in the beginning, when Michael turned it off, I go, over the transom? What is that? And apparently it's a term. And I have never heard this in my entire life. Am I the only one? Am I not well read? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, no, this is an invitation to all of you out there to send us fan mail telling us that you're better cultured than Melissa.
Yeah, I don't know, man. Over the transom? Like,
over
who
the transom.
uses that?
I do.
Okay. So just so you know, Michael did use the term over the transom. So if you're like, what did I hear?
I think it's
that's
a sweet phrase.
It sounds made up. Transom sounds made up. That's why, and when I guessed it, I thought I was guessing what you said. I thought you garbled your words.
It is kind of wrinkle and timey. But yeah, you can also, listeners, you can also write in and instruct me as to what phrase I should have used rather than over the transom. But I'm satisfied with my choice.
Okay.
Okay.
That's cool. Anyways, we are currently enjoying a cocktail, courtesy of Don Ciccio in DC. We have these little cocktail mixers, so we're having a nice date night right now.
And we're celebrating. Right before we started recording, I sent off the first draft of the book manuscript.
Praise God.
Which feels great. And we had a great week at the Center for Christianity and Public Life. We were able to finally announce the inaugural class of our Public Life Fellowship program. Really incredible leaders as part of this first class. You can go to ccpubliclife.org and learn more about the program. You can meet our fellows, and you could learn more about the Center for Christianity and Public Life. But it was a lot of fun to be able to make that announcement this week.
It's such an impressive group of people.
I mean, it's what I'm excited about is they're all impressive on their own. I'm so excited for them to meet one another.
Yeah.
And that's just going to be really, really special. And so cheers to that. It's been
Michael.
a good. Yeah. Let's. There we go.
You'll hear probably tinkling throughout the podcast because we're just busy drinking these cocktails.
Yeah. But Melissa, when we were talking about this episode, you had an idea, and I thought, yeah, no, that sounds right. So why don't you tee up the conversation for us?
Yeah, so here we go. And I mean, we've talked about some of these things in the Morning Five over the past couple of weeks, but some people don't listen to the Morning Five, so I'll just give a little overview. But if it feels like the news has been a bit chaotic over the last 2 weeks, it's felt chaotic to me, and someone who is constantly buried deep into the news, deep into politics, and even I have been surprised. It's been a couple of things. One being that big balloon, the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down near Myrtle Beach, that was around 2 weeks ago. And then over the last week, 3 more objects were shot down in various areas in North America. So not just the United States, but North America. We worked with the Canadians to shoot down a couple of the objects, and then one over Lake Huron. And for quite a while, all anybody could do was just speculate, like, what were these objects? Were these balloons? Were these also from China? Are these aliens, like actual, UFOs, unidentified flying objects? What were they doing? Why did we shoot them down? Why are we getting stories about one of the objects interfering with the radio signals of one of the F-22 jets? Are we going to see more objects? Why is there this sudden spate when, previous to this, we had never heard of any kind of objects being shot down, at least, for quite a long time, anywhere near United States airspace. So we've got that. Then on February 3rd, there was a huge train derailment in East Palestine, Ohio, which is right near the Ohio and Pennsylvania border. So just like kind of northwest of Pittsburgh, if I've got the geography right. This train derailment, February 3rd, 50-car derailment, and around 5 of the cars had vinyl chloride in them. And vinyl chloride, it started to burn, and the burning off creates a couple of really, really dangerous gases. And so that entire small town was evacuated for a while, and then folks were told, okay, the air is safe, the water is safe to drink, come back in. And, I actually first heard of this entire train derailment on TikTok over a week later. About 8 days later was the first time I heard of it. And all of a sudden, my algorithm, because I happened to watch that one TikTok thought, oh, okay, you want to watch news stories about this particular train derailment. Then it was just people innocently, so not like trained up conspiracy theorists, but people innocently starting to ask questions of, is this being covered up? Why is this not in the mainstream news? Is the water actually safe to drink? Is the air actually safe to breathe? We're hearing reports from residents that it hurts to breathe. We're hearing reports of people's pets dying, of fish being dead in the Ohio River, all kinds of stuff. So, and then all of a sudden we had a couple more train derailments, one in Houston. We had the nitric acid truck crash in Tucson, Arizona just a few days ago. And it feels like, wait, just kind of like the unidentified flying objects thing, it feels like, wait, hold up. Why are we suddenly hearing about all of these various very dangerous chemical materials being spilled or, involved in some kind of crash? So I said to Michael, if I'm feeling like this is a bit chaotic, and if I'm feeling like we're not getting enough information, how must anybody else be feeling about this? And because of things like speculation and entities like the federal government, especially with the flying objects, like the federal government has a responsibility to not speculate on behalf of the American people. The federal government has a responsibility to work on whatever classified information it has and to make public whatever it can make public. And so just yesterday, President Biden, so that's Thursday at around 2 p.m., he gave a press conference talking about these 4 unidentified flying objects that have been shot down, confirming that, yes, the first one, the balloon, came from China, and that the other 3, he confirmed that they have no way of, they do not know that it's not from China. So they're confirming that we don't have any confirmation that any of them are from China or any kind of surveillance balloon, and that in fact that some of these objects might have been used for the purposes of recreation or for research or from private companies.
I'm sorry. I just want to.
Yes.
So he confirmed that for the other 3.
Yes.
They don't know the origin yet. It could be China. Yes. It might not be China.
He pretty much used language that said it's not China. Like it wasn't like completely definitive, but pretty much said that no, this is not China. So here's an actual quote. And quote, the intelligence community's current assessment is that these 3 objects were most likely balloons tied to private companies, recreation, or research institutions studying weather or conducting other scientific research. He's asking the intelligence community to take a broad look at the phenomenon of unidentified aerial objects. And one of the other things that he said in this speech, which I had been hearing elsewhere but obviously unconfirmed, is that we are, and this is a quote again from President Biden, we are now just seeing more of them partially because of the steps we've taken to increase our radars, to narrow our radars, and we have to keep adapting our approach to delaying to dealing with these challenges, end quote. So after the first balloon incident, the one around 2 weeks ago, the United States changed what its radars were looking at. Like, I don't know the exact details, but apparently we changed what our radars were looking at, changed criterion, something like that. And therefore, we started seeing these other objects. And now, out of an abundance of caution, because the big one that was shot down, the actual surveillance balloon from a foreign country, they're now shooting these things down out of an abundance of caution and working with Canada because some of them were over Canadian airspace. So we got that speech from President Biden. And so now it feels like, okay, we've gotten some official word from the federal government. This is as much information as they're releasing at this point. But before all this, you have a long time to speculate. And, I on various social media platforms and various conversations, the speculation was rampant. The conspiracy theories it's feeding into was rampant. And in a lot of ways, you can't blame anybody because it's really interesting to have these 2 particular news items at this current time because we know that there's a lack of trust in general in society. And there's a lack of trust in government and a lack of trust in authority. And then we have so much access to so much information and have the ability to just, make a quick reel or TikTok video or write a tweet, just stating what you think it is or what you think is happening or you think this, this person's in cahoots with this person kind of thing. We have, because of the whole information highway that is the internet, we have people with the ability to actually share what they think right in real time. And so it all feels like a bit chaotic and a bit like we're living in a literal conspiracy theory. And then with the derailment, I started looking into it and I thought, we're starting to get an explanation as to why suddenly we have a bunch of unidentified flying objects being shot down. And apparently it's because we've changed what our radars are looking at. Okay. With the train derailments, I wanted to see how many train derailments do we have each year? Is this an unusual number in just a matter of a week? And we have, in 2022, there were 1,044 train derailments in the United States. So 1,000 in 2022. Back in the 1980s, there were upwards of 3,000 derailments. So apparently the freight rail industry has improved safety over the years. So we've got that. So it's not completely unusual that any kind of train would derail because apparently our freight rail system is a bit shaky. It needs to be updated from everything that I'm reading. And along those lines with how news was reported and who actually is in charge of the freight rail industry when it comes to the government side of things. There are several agencies that actually have some kind of role in the industry. There's the Surface Transportation Board, the Federal Railroad Administration, the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. You have the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, obviously, if there's some kind of spill. You have the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration that can get involved, and then the National Transportation Safety Board that can get involved. So that's a lot of different agencies at play here. And so I would imagine that in a lot of ways, actually, you have a very localized incident. So you have local government and local officials having to feed into state officials, having to feed in federal officials. And if the federal level is already sort of kind of spread out in terms of its response, it's also not a surprise that information coming out would be trickled, would be a bit haphazard, a bit ad hoc. But anyways, I wanted to look into that of okay, wait a minute. Why are suddenly these trains derailing? And apparently these trains carry a lot of really dangerous chemicals constantly, because a lot of like this vinyl chloride apparently goes into making plastics, which, I mean, everything is made of plastics these days. So you can imagine that there's just chemicals crossing this country constantly because they're being used by various industries to make various materials. I'm going to stop there. Michael, to sort of continue our conversation, especially for listeners, when things like this happen, I guess you and I, we use a bunch of different practices of, okay, assessing the situation and reacting, not reacting. Do you have like best practices? Do you have advice here? Are you do you want to put your tinfoil hat on and be like, this is, this was all a sham? I mean, what do you say?
So I'm afraid either this will be really helpful for folks, or it will make me, where people will be like, gosh, she's aloof. I view these kinds of stories in the same way that we've talked on previous episodes about sort of investigations and the way that in DC these sorts of like investigations, information leaks out, and sort of there's basically like gossip reporting. And I view these things in a very similar way. Like, I am waiting to hear official word on what is happening, and I don't follow every dip and turn in these stories because you will go crazy. And you really, sometimes you might miss it. The 0.1% of the time when all of the speculation actually adds up to something real. But I guess what I'd say is, like, as someone who pays a lot of attention to the news and has for a very long time, so often you just get a feel for the kinds of stories and the kind of reporting that either A, isn't going to quite end up being what it was played up to be, or B, turns out to be like a complete waste of time, like actually was like pure speculation. And so my advice on stuff like this, I know it's like, it was such a weird story, for this balloon. But so this really helps you get a sense, though. Like, right? Like, I think it was a Fox News anchor said that the balloon, it referred to its odyssey across the continental U.S., which is hilarious. I just love calling it an odyssey. But B, like, goes...
She was spreading her wings and flying.
Yeah, what a... it shows how much of these kinds of stories are sort of media manufactured kinds of things. So my primary advice is, like, you don't need to follow every dip and turn in a story like this. And isn't it interesting how the stories that raise our anxiety, the stories that consume our attention, are stories that really the normal person can't do anything about. Like, right? It's a weird... What am I going to do about a Chinese spy balloon over Montana and making its odyssey across the U.S.? Like, there's no expertise I have to offer. There's no real immediate need for... I hold this lightly. Someone can maybe prove me prove me wrong. I don't think like democratic input immediately on something like this is really an essential thing. It's like, let's figure out what this is. I have zero role in figuring out what it is. I do not have
You just reminded me, because there was a story this past week as well, which compounded my sort of like, what? The bingo card is just filling up with things that I did not know it would fill up with. But we recorded for the first time ever, astronomers, that a piece of the sun broke off.
Right.
And I thought, is that bad?
Right.
Is that normal? Because, these news articles were just like a piece of the sun broke off. And I'm like, you need to provide me with more information.
Some context, please.
I need some more quotes from astronomers telling me that this is a normal thing, and therefore, but it's the first time we record it. And then it just hit me, Michael, because I was 5 minutes into the deep dive of like, okay, where's a quote from an astronomer to tell me like exactly what this means? And I thought, we have zero control over the sun. The sun can literally do whatever it can and wants.
Yes.
And we have no control over it.
Correct.
We have zero control over it. None whatsoever. We can just literally sit and watch it.
Yes.
And burn. So burn our eyeballs. So anyways, I mean, that's for, because that was this past week too, where I thought, okay, it's a Friday night. I need to just log off. So another rule of thumb, log off. As soon as you feel your anxiety rising, log off. Go do something else. Take a breath. But my other general rule of thumb,
particularly with stories like this. I mean, so there are some stories in some news items that you probably do need to sit with.
And the train derailment, I would argue, you
can do something about. That you can actually learn something from the coverage in the immediate term that is worthwhile at the time, as opposed to just waiting for the story to clarify itself.
Yep. And I would say that the train derailment is one of those stories where there is something you can do if it does concern you, if you would like something done, specifically about like the safety of the freight rail industry, the fact that trains have gotten so much longer so that they have to have fewer workers per train. And so like on this particular train, they're saying that there weren't enough workers on it and that the train had previously had some problems structurally and should have been checked more. So, you could write to your congressperson or to your senator saying, I would like you to look into I would like you to support the National Transportation Safety Board a bit more in making our freight rail industry more safe. So there's things like that. And then my other rule of thumb is from like the 20,000 foot level. So like when you're looking at something like this train derailment, like UFOs, like a piece of the sun breaking off, is that if you're not immediately involved, like if you're not living in East Palestine, Ohio, or Pittsburgh, or any of those immediate areas around it, it is okay, again, to log off, to stop, to take Michael's advice that, and I do the exact same thing, Michael and I do practice this, that Michael and I try not to speculate. We try not to speculate pretty much at all. We always wait for more information, especially official information, and not just information that came from a friend, like through telephone. It's okay to wait. And if you are obviously located in East Palestine, again, or in the surrounding areas, then obviously your livelihood is like more involved, and like there's obviously an emotional element to it. And so we're not speaking to, like, if any of our listeners happen to live in the area, this type of advice like isn't speaking directly to you, because we know that if you're in like the direct aftermath of something like this, then clearly you're operating in a different environment than the general one that we're talking about here. But
I don't think we have a huge contingency of East Palestine, Ohio.
I don't think so. We do have our survey out, and I've been looking at where people are located. It's been actually really, really fun to see where listeners are coming in from, but I don't think I've seen anybody from that area. But give a shout if you do, and you can let us know how it's going. So I think we can end that conversation there, but I just wanted to have a little bit of an episode on something like that, because we know that the news cycle goes on, and that there will be more tidbits of news coming out about all of these situations, and then new issues and new situations and current events will pop up that will sort of throw us for a loop. And so we wanted to give just a bit of like the rules of thumb and the things that Michael and I practice on the daily sort of stem the feeling of chaos, the feeling of just trying to lower the temperature, lowering the anxiety.
Yeah. All right. We'll take a quick break, and when we get back, just a couple thoughts on forgiveness. You're listening to Where We Are. As you know, Where We Are is part of the That Sounds Fun network, and we're so glad to be a part of this community for many reasons, including that it's just full of wonderful people and wonderful podcasts, including the Human Hope podcast hosted by Carlos Whitaker. Now, I've known Carlos for a very long time. He's a wonderful guy. He's an author, a speaker, a People's Choice Award winner, a former recording artist signed to a major label, and he's really just a fun, hopeful voice to listen to. And the Human Hope podcast is a great way to learn more and hear from Carlos. New episodes are released every Thursday. And on the show, there are fun discussions about everyday joy to even polarizing and challenging topics. And in the midst of that, Carlos's personality really shines through. You can follow Carlos on Instagram at Loswhit, Loswhit, and visit carloswhitaker.com. That's Whittaker, carloswhitaker.com. And hope you'll check out this acclaimed podcast from my dude, Carlos Whitaker. We're back. This is Where We Are. And Melissa, earlier this month, I got to attend what I think is one of the best events in DC that I've ever attended.
What was it?
Baylor University, in partnership with some other great organizations, but Baylor was the driver, hosted a conversation on the politics of forgiveness with our homie Liz Brunig, Bishop Claude Alexander, another favorite.
Yes, we love Claude.
And Reverend Fleming Rutledge. Matthew Lee Anderson moderated. I mean, it was just, I'd travel to hear any of those folks speak. To have them all on a panel was spectacular. The main thing I want to say about the panel is it's available online. Would really encourage folks to spend time with it. I mean, just a wonderful conversation. And again, just kudos to Baylor for having the vision to do an event like that. But I think about forgiveness a lot. I think about the public value of forgiveness and the public role for forgiveness. Melissa, I wrote about forgiveness in the wake of Charleston.
Yeah, you wrote about it in Christianity Today.
Wrote about it in Christianity Today, and that piece struck a chord. A number of people shared it. Ta-Nehisi Coates shared it. Amy Sullivan, the journalist, shared it. It tapped into a moment, I think, and part of what it tapped into was this concern that I argued was not merited at the time, that people were having forgiveness imposed on them. And I thought of that moment. We had all these op-eds and thought pieces and tweets that were basically like anti-forgiveness. Like we shouldn't be, like forgiveness is not a good thing. It lets people off the hook. And I think one of the main lines of argument was that that there was this, I think people saw people being praised for forgiving and assumed that had they not expressed forgiveness, that they would have been shamed or pressured into it. At the time, I didn't see evidence of that because there were people involved, family members in Charleston who didn't express forgiveness.
Yep, that's right. There are a multitude of responses.
Yeah, a multitude of responses. But this is sort of like a card. This is like a card that gets played, and people need to problematize things. And so forgiveness was problematized. Civility operates much the same way. There's like this hypothetical that, sure, I guess you could maybe like find examples, but there's this, in my view, an overall concern that if civility is valued, then it becomes a weapon, and people who are not civil will have civility sort of thrust upon them in a undue coercive way. I thought of all of this week when we saw the verdict in Buffalo.
Yeah, for the shooting that happened this past spring in Buffalo at Tops Market. 10 people were murdered, I think it was 3 or 4 injured by a lone gunman, Peyton Gendron. And yes, there was the sentencing this week, and victims' family members attended, and some of them spoke.
Yeah. So there was we've seen stories, some read scripture. There was at least one family member of a victim who said, quote, Brian Talley said, "I forgive you, but I forgive you not for your sake, but for mine and for this black community." Others did not express forgiveness, expressed rage and anger, and heartbreak. Probably most strikingly is the video circulated of one of the family members while someone else was speaking, sort of charging. I think he probably knew he was going to be stopped, but just could not contain himself and charged the shooter, and the shooter was sort of raced out of the room, and police had to restrain the man who charged. And I just no one wondered why he reacted that way. No one sort of said that I saw. No one said, "Oh, he really shouldn't be upset. He really should. Well, why hasn't he forgiven him yet?" It's understandable. Like, the understandable thing in our culture is not to forgive. The reason why forgiveness receives attention is not because it's something that's imposed, but because it doesn't seem necessary. It seems extraordinary, and so I was just reminded of that whole conversation, and I think it's like a really good. I think it's just helpful to keep in mind not to get too caught up in these sort of manufactured narratives that suggest that what's praiseworthy can't be praised, what's admirable can't be admired, even if you doubt that you yourself would have the capacity for such an act, and even if you wouldn't demand that act from someone who wasn't ready or willing to give it. And so that's the point about forgiveness that I wanted to make. That I don't. I don't think an abundance of forgiveness is the crushing social problem that we face right now. I think we could probably do with quite a bit more of it, but forgiveness cannot be coerced like other meaningful acts of will. Forgiveness isn't forgiveness if it's coerced. It must be willed, and it must come as a it must come honestly. So
I watched some of the sentencing, and all around it was just so difficult, and obviously emotions were so raw, no matter who it was coming from or what it was that they were there, that they felt that they needed to do. But no, you're completely right. I think it's just in some ways it's just a complete misunderstanding of what forgiveness actually is, and the fact that forgiveness is usually coming from a very big wrong, and it's very difficult to do. And I think everybody forgets that it's like a really difficult thing to do. It's not an easy thing to do. So the idea that it would be coerced, especially in situations like this where a family member's been murdered, whether it's Charleston or Buffalo or any of the other ones, no.
No, I mean, right, we have entire, we have entire movie franchises that are built around exacting revenge. We have our culture is replete with examples of sort of the supposed valor of not forgiving. And so just this idea that forgiveness is this thing, it is that we're in danger of being too forgiving as a society. Just doesn't ring true for me. I think for those who are able to express forgiveness, not just in cases like this, but in all kinds of situations where wrong has taken place, I think those deserve to be recognized and not pathologized.
And people do it in their own time, and I mean that's the other thing is there's a temporal element to this, people being like, how can they do that right away? And it's well, for some people it is, and for some people it's not. Yeah. And for some people it doesn't ever come. And I mean there's just all kinds of we're definitely seeing that play out, obviously this week in Buffalo. Yeah. But that's it for this week.
Really good to be with you. Thanks for taking a look at the survey in the show notes. Would really love to hear from you.
Yes, we've got a bunch of responses, and I've honestly had a really fun time reading them.
Yeah.
Especially the question of asking how everybody is. Most folks have answered it. It's been really interesting, sometimes fun, sometimes some of you are really feeling the pressure right now, or you're in pain because you just had surgery, and so... for anybody who's put down something like that, we'll be praying for you. Someone put down that they're getting married in 4 months and they're really looking forward to it. And so I won't say their name, but congratulations. So it's really fun to learn about what's going on in your life.
Yeah, really
Thanks
good.
For responding.
All right, friends. Talk to you next week. This has been Where We Are.
Bye.
It's the end of the weekend, but I still wanna turn up. Yeah, I still wanna turn up. All I want is to go again, but you ain't